Welcome everyone to AURI Connect's Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connect's monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. I'm Dan Skelgan, the AURI Director of Industry and Government Relations, and your host for Fields of Innovation. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. Fields of Innovation is focused on bringing together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity and successfully commercialize new and emerging crops. Events will focus on highlighting new crops, examining marketing opportunities for emerging crops, and highlighting new technologies in existing crops. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Today we'll be exploring ecosystem services markets. Our guests include Steve Peterson, Board Chair of Headwater Agriculture Sustainability Partnership. Steve has over 25 years of experience in food and agriculture, spending most of his career with General Mills. Steve was the Director of Sustainable Sourcing and Chairman of Field to Market in 2015 when he retired. Apart from his corporate career, Peterson has always been in production agriculture. Currently, Steve owns and operates Peterson Farms, a crop and beef operation located near Paynesville, Minnesota. Over the past several years, he has combined his decades of experience in food and agriculture to lead key industry sustainability organizations. Steve served as board chair of Field to Market in 2014-15 and Minnesota Agri-Growth in 2015-16. We'll also hear from Leif Fixen, Agriculture Strategy Manager with the Nature Conservancy. Leif is the Nature Conservancy's liaison to the world of food production in Minnesota. He's also a former farm kid with lots of experience and perspectives on land management. Leif is well versed in what it means to work with nature to build healthy and sustainable farms. Now he's bringing that expertise to the work of the Nature Conservancy with the goals of protecting water resources, unlocking the climate potential of agricultural lands, and helping farmers improve their overall productivity in the process. And we will hear from Lucas Sjostrom, the Executive Director of Minnesota Milk Producers Association. Lucas works for Midwest Dairy as a farmer relations manager and Minnesota Milk as executive director. He focuses on policy and legislative relations, university relations, and industry relations, spending much of his time working with regulators, legislators, researchers, and allied industry representatives. Lucas is also a partner in his family's dairy farm and cheese plant. Remember again, participants, you are muted, but you can ask your questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. And with that, Steve Peterson, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Thank you, Dan. I guess good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for including us here. I'm going to spend a few minutes here just sort of setting the stage for my presenting partners here to kind of give the big picture. I have two objectives: to provide background just about what ecosystem markets are and a little bit of history, and then to give a real kind of top line overview of the ecosystem service markets consortium, and Leif will be talking much more in detail about that after I'm done. So what are ecosystem services? This isn't personally very intuitive for me. I would really say, kind of boiling it down, it's nature takes care of us in ways that we don't really appreciate. The forests of the world are the lungs of the earth, converting through photosynthesis, carbon dioxide to oxygen that we all breathe. The wetlands, in some ways, my wife, the physician, helped with these analogies, are sort of the kidneys of the earth, helping to clean our water. And the soil, last but not least, is our circulating system that really helps through, regenerates and grows food for us. I think myself and most of us as citizens have taken this for granted. But as the population of the world grows and we need to feed more people, it's more of a challenge. My friend Jason Clay at the World Wildlife Fund remembers saying that at this point in time, the humanity consumes the equivalent of over 2 Earths at a time, meaning that Mother Nature, we're consuming it at twice the rate in terms of sustainability, in terms of utilizing the capability that Mother Nature has. So the challenge of these, of sort of letting Mother Nature do its thing, we need to sort of work with it a little bit more to feed the 8 billion people today and 10 billion people in the future. Another reason is that now public lands across the world in the United States are privately owned. 70% of lands in the United States are owned. So the question is, how do we feed the global population while preserving or even enhancing Mother Nature? And that's really why the context of this discussion today. The best example of an ecosystem market is actually the Conservation Reserve Program. Again, it's not a fully developed private trading market like we have, but where the government extended contracts for producers. I did that for many years, taking your land out of production. The CRP went up to 40 million acres and is about 20 million acres today. The point is that really isn't sufficient. And what this whole initiative is to really use the power of capitalism, use the power of technology and science to really help pay producers, farmers and ranchers to enhance soil and to be paid for that activity. So the Ecosystem Market Consortium was launched in 2017, just 2 years ago. I'm proud that General Mills, where I used to work, Jerry Lynch, my old boss, is one of the kind of the founding thought leaders here in making this happen. The consortium itself actually launched in 2019 with 10 private sector partners. The mission of ESMC is to advance ecosystem markets to incentivize farmers and ranchers to improve soil health systems that benefit society. Some key principles of ESMC is that, first of all, I think this is what makes it unique. It's independent. It's not a part of a government. It's not a part of a large corporation. It's a nonprofit independent entity. Its participation is voluntary, participation of both buyers and sellers that we'll get into a moment. It's science-based, very important that to trade these things, it needs to be based. It's really the integrity infrastructure foundation of the program is that it needs to be real and science-based. It's important that payments for this are based on outcomes, not practices. We're not telling producers what to do. We're actually compensating them for once they do things. And it's unique, and Leif has taught me this. You hear that it's multiple markets. We can stack, it's called. We can take some of these benefits and get paid for multiple things at once. So what is the ESMC up to? It's very much developing the protocol. It's the methodology for trading and for compensating farmers for this work. It's developing pilots across the United States to help test these protocols. It's been estimated that the value of this market is just less than $14 billion. So there's a lot of potential value. Let me kind of go one little layer lower to give you an example of what we're talking about here. One of the pilots is, again, my former employer, General Mills, is in partnership with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. General Mills grows a lot of wheat for gold medal flour and all in the Cheney River Basin or reservoir area of Kansas. And there is a pilot with about 25 wheat producers there. And in that case, General Mills will be the buyer of these credits, the benefits produced and paying these wheat farmers for their outcomes, conservation outcomes. Why is General Mills interested in that as a corporate citizen? General Mills has made a commitment to all of its stakeholders to reduce its carbon footprint by 28% by 2025. Knowing, and when I worked there, I worked on this. It's a big deal because the majority of the carbon footprint of General Mills is in agriculture. So General Mills, by doing this and can afford to pay these producers for this, to help make its commitments to consumers and society that it's going to reduce its carbon footprint, as an example. A second example would be one that is, I'm just kind of giving a futuristic deal. About a year ago, I participated in a forum down in Mankato on it's called the Minnesota River Ag Urban Partnership. There's been a lot of discussion about how to work along the Minnesota River and create partnerships between municipalities, specifically wastewater treatment systems and upstream farmers along the Minnesota River. So potentially, this one could be where CHS, it has a soil press soybean crush plant in Mankato, could work with its soybean producers along the Mississippi River. So what's the value here? Many of the municipalities along the Mississippi, their wastewater treatment systems to sort of filter and reduce runoff, phosphorus and nitrogen are old, and they're not doing their job, and they need literally millions of dollars of investment to improve those. Wouldn't it be better to actually work with farmers upstream, paying them a lot less money than millions of dollars to help improve conservation practice and reduce runoff upstream? So that would be another example of a marketplace, trading marketplace between sort of a public entity and private entities. So I just wanted, in review, I think this is very exciting. We have the one pilot of 8 pilots across the United States today happening in Minnesota. I'm gonna, Dan, that's the end of my comments, and Leif's gonna follow up next to tell you more about what's happening here in Minnesota.
I appreciate that, Steve. When I think about a payment structure for the farmers, how do we develop that baseline, or does everybody get to start at their own place? And then how do we benchmark it to see that progress is being made, or am I getting us too far out in the weeds?
No, I don't think so. Leif, I think we'll be talking to this, but basically it's technology and measurement is really important. So what happens when Leif is doing this right now, signing up the initial farmers, and we're actually taking soil samples of their current base. What is the carbon content of their soil and that sort of thing. And then we'll look at improvements over time and pay and compensate them for that. Now there is a little bit of, I would call it an arbitrage element. Economists would do this because like the improvements, the outcomes, as we all know in agriculture, take a while. They don't happen the first month. They might take years. So the marketplace helps sort of solve that arbitrage deal. So we're going to try to compensate farmers sooner, but really true up after 5 years when we can truly see these benefits. So is that helpful, Dan?
It is, and I think you made a good point early on in your comments where Mother Nature is willing to be a partner in this. If we, make her healthier, she'll bring us along.
Absolutely. And I think a key part of this whole program is, I think in the last 10 years, as far myself, there's been this renaissance around the appreciation of soil and all that. And it's sort of this win-win for conservation and for producers. We can actually improve soil health, improving productivity, while at the same time really helping society with some of the brief examples that I mentioned.
And I know you still have your hand on farming. Have you seen your operation change, Steve?
Yeah, in all honesty, Dan, we've kind of are stepping back as we get older and farm management's retired. So we're just in the last year, we're renting things out, but still working closely with our renters. So I would say we are a egg water quality certified farm, and we've done that the last number of years. But so that's the status of our own farm here in Stearns County.
Appreciate your comments, and thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
With that, let's turn our attention to Leif Fixon. Leif, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Thanks. And I want to first start by saying thank you to AURI for giving us a platform to talk about the work we're doing up in central Minnesota here and our ESMC pilot. So I thought I'd first introduce folks to the Nature Conservancy real quick. I am an ag strategy manager for them. I function both kind of at the state, or what we call a chapter level, as well as our North America kind of program. PNC as a whole is a global nonprofit focused on land conservation. We operate in, I think, around 74 countries, have about 4,000 employees, and with a quarter of those being scientists. We pride ourselves in being a science-based organization, so that is at the core of what guides both our programs and our focus areas. Right now, we've got four kind of strategic priorities that we're working towards. One is tackling climate change. Two is protecting land and water. That's kind of our bread and butter, what we got started with, land conservation, protecting native grasslands, stuff like that. My work lives a lot under the provide food and water sustainably, though is as you're going to learn in this presentation, is bridging very strongly into that tackling climate change priority, and then building healthy cities. Our overall mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends, and that very much so includes people as part of the ecosystem. So thanks, Steve, for that introduction, and you covered a lot of kind of my bullet points here. But right now, I feel like saying, you called it a renaissance of soil health and environmental markets right now is occurring. I sometimes refer to it a little bit as the wild, wild west, but there's a lot happening right now as it relates, especially to carbon in ag. And there's a lot of different platforms and programs that a farm can enroll in as they start to implement practices that help sequester and store more carbon or improve the ecosystem service benefit that an acre of land provides. PNC has gotten involved with ESMC, Ecosystem Service Marketplace, and we kind of have gotten involved with that one for a number of reasons. As Steve mentioned, one of the big things that we like about the platform is it allows for multiple credits to be created from one kind of system. So what that means is, in addition to a carbon credit, you can also generate a water quality credit, a water quantity credit, and then inside of those, you have subsets. So one platform, and you can generate, I think, up to 6 different credits. So both a carbon and a methane credit, a water quantity credit, and then potentially inside of water quality, you got phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment. So I guess it eliminates or gives one platform for multiple pathways for a farmer. So it gets rid of multiple programs. The nonprofit is focused on benefiting the farmer, not trying to make money off of this process. It offers both a regulatory and a voluntary credit, which if you're just interested in the voluntary credits, so like for a corporate supply chain type project, it allows for some cost savings there. As Steve mentioned, it's industry led. The protocols are open to any member, so it's not a mystery black box that's generating these carbon credits. It's open and kind of transparent, the process. And it blends both technology and soil testing. So it takes advantage of remote sensing and modeling to kind of keep costs down, but it has that periodic soil test to make sure that the change that's being measured or estimated is actually happening on the ground. And another benefit of ESMC, and this is one that we really like at TNC, as our work isn't just in row crops, it's also in grasslands, is that it can be applied to both row crop acres and grass acres. This I think is going to be really good for Minnesota in that it allows a farmer to generate additional income off of, say, buffer strips or grass waterways, or say there's some unproductive or less productive acres in a field that they could put into grass and either graze it, hay it, hunt it kind of deal, and still make credits. So the fact that you can do it on more than just row crop acres is I think going to be really important as we move forward. And then their overall approach of testing the program, the algorithms, protocols first before going to like a nationwide launch. Right now, the plan is to launch a marketplace in 2022. Steve mentioned this, industry-led. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this just because there's a lot going on here, but there's a lot of support for ESMC. These folks over here on the left is that founding circle. These are the ones that kind of initially came together to launch it. It was initially launched inside of the Soil Health Institute and has since then been spun out as its own nonprofit. But in addition to those founding members who put up, their membership dues, this was made possible with additional funds and kind of seed funding from the organizations you see on the screen here. So I always like to give credit where credit's due. We wouldn't be where we're at today if it weren't for these folks. So thank you. Steve mentioned this is a part of a kind of a nationwide effort. So we're launching pilots in different kind of growing systems, different cropping systems, and different climates to make sure that these protocols and the system works across the U.S. and has some scalability. And so kind of with that, I'll start diving into our Minnesota project here. Probably end of, we're coming up on a year now that a group of us have started kind of talking about, hey, let's see what we can do on this. And this conversation started inside of a group of us that are meeting up in central Minnesota called the Headwaters Agricultural Sustainability Partnership, HASP, as well as some conversations that NRCS was initiating. And so as those conversations progressed, we kind of merged efforts and said, hey, let's work on this together. And hey, this ESMC platform looks pretty good. From there, we decided let's try and figure out a good spot where we can work on both the carbon credit side of things as well as the water quality side of things. So for our pilot, we're focusing on kind of voluntary scope 3 credits. We're going to be running full algorithms, so we can do that scope 1 kind of more regulatory focused credit and carbon as well. And then we're also going to be working towards water quality credits. So as kind of Steve mentioned, that scenario where a wastewater treatment facility isn't meeting their permit anymore, they could buy credits off of this market. We started talking about, okay, where are we going to touch this thing down? The guidance from ESMC was that for these initial pilots, don't get too big. Pick a geography that you can get your arms around. General Mills was kind of the first one to get their pilot up and running. They had obviously their mill shed in mind. So, they're farmers that are supplying grain to them. We had a little more flexibility, and because we wanted to focus on water quality in addition to carbon, we kind of started looking at different watersheds around the state that already had a significant investment in both technical assistance, so like technical expertise and assistance available to farmers, as well as cost share to help reduce the upfront risk and the financial burden in those first few years. And so the Sauk River watershed really kind of started to show up as a top contender for where we touch this down. The other component that we wanted to make sure was part of this pilot, both from an ESMC standpoint as well as a local priorities standpoint, was we wanted a watershed that had a dairy component to it. And when you add that in, the Sauk really stands out. It's the #1 county in Minnesota as it relates to dairy, and they're ranked 28th in the nation as a dairy producing county. And the reason why we like this is because it kind of stacks the decks. It really makes it a lot easier to start implementing soil health practices like cover crops and perennial cropping systems when you have a strong ruminant economy that can take advantage of that forage. So it's one more thing where a farmer can make a little bit of money back off of that soil health practice investment. The group also wanted to like, in addition to just testing out the protocols and being a pilot for ESMC, we had some additional things that we wanted to dive into. Up top, that's more kind of what USMC is interested in. We're also very interested in this. For this thing to work, it needs to be as efficient as possible. And really what that means is that the overhead is as low as possible to keep as much of every credit that's sold, the value of that credit going to the farmer versus being tied up in kind of overhead costs, which include, validation, measurement, all that kind of stuff. So we're looking at ways to reduce soil testing costs. We're looking at ways to leverage existing data that's already being collected, whether it's through a public or a proprietary sustainability or farm data tool. So we're working with the Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program. We're working with the Field to Market and their field print calculator. We're working with Land O'Lakes and their Truterra platform. We're working with Syngenta and their LandDB. So the list goes on and there, and we're open to other platforms hopping in here as well. We kind of want to create this as a lab space or a safe space to test out how your platform might link up to the ESMC. In addition to that kind of efficiency stuff, we wanted to zoom out just a little bit and kind of do enterprise assessment of the value of these soil health practices. I'll talk about this a little later, but this isn't a carbon credit for an acre of land isn't anywhere close to offsetting the overall cost of doing cover crops, and it's going to take demonstrating the overall value of a soil health system to really accelerate the adoption of the practices. So we're doing kind of enterprise return on investment kind of work with ag-centric and their farm business management, as well as the HASP group that I mentioned earlier. They've got a return on investment study. We're doing kind of the edge of field economics. So how much money can you make off of ecosystem service credits for those edge of field acres? So buffers, grass waterways, filter strips, kind of working wetlands, stuff like that. We're also really interested in the amplifying effect that well-managed manure might have on soil health and ultimately credit generation. And then obviously the integration of alternative cropping systems. And so this is the Forever Green work, ferns, pennycress, any of the other perennial crops, or working alfalfa more into a rotation, stuff like that. How does that show up economically for a farmer? We're estimating that over 5 years, so we're targeting 50,000 acres. That's our goal of enrollment over the next 2 years. And we're estimating that over the 5 years of the pilot here, that'll sack away or sequester around 125,000 tons of carbon. We're kind of trying to underestimate because we don't want to be in a situation of overpromising anything. This is a list of kind of our existing partners that have agreed to help us out in one way or another. We've kind of got 5 or 6 teams set up, or we're in the process of setting up these 6 teams. So farmer outreach, the field work. So like, how are we actually getting these farmers enrolled? How are we getting the ag data onto the platform? How are we getting the soil tests collected? Platform integration, talked about that a little bit. The farm economics, talked about that. And then market development. So we're really, as part of this pilot, we're also recruiting buyers to this marketplace that'll exist in 2 years. So if you are working for a company who is looking for some carbon credits or some carbon assets, or would like to validate some carbon in your supply chain, please reach out. We're working with Embold, AURI on this, the MPCA, from that water quality side of things. As well as the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, which is a collection of mayors up and down the Mississippi River. And then there's the research component. We're going to be working on 50,000 acres of farmland. Let's try and leverage that as much as we can. Project leadership is being provided by the Nature Conservancy, as well as the Ecosystem Service Markets Consortium. And that HASP group that I mentioned earlier, they're functioning as our advisory committee. The overall process for a farmer. So year 1, you sign up. The first thing you do is you turn in your agronomic crop data. So fertilizers, yields, tillage practices, crops, rotations, all that fun stuff. and then a soil sample is pulled to establish a baseline. Then each year after that, through modeling and remote sensing verification, we generate carbon credits, or well, whatever credit that whatever market you're going after are generated, and then you are issued those credits, and you're able to market those credits on the marketplace. And every 5 years, there's a true up soil sample. Everything's been hopefully appropriately detuned a little bit so that a farmer's not going to be in a situation of where we've overestimated the amount of carbon that they've sequestered, and that really that 5 year will kind of be a bonus year after the soil test results. Right now for the pilot, we've got about $2.5 million, mainly coming from NRCS. They're our lead kind of sponsor for this initial pilot. And then the Department of Ag's Ag Water Quality Certification is putting up a good chunk of in-kind contribution through, the helping target some of their ag cert work and recruit some of their farmers. And then TNC is also coming to the table with some funding as well to get this up and running. I always like to stress that this does not include the cost share that is already focused on the watershed. So thank you to the Bowser and the SWCD and everybody else, NRCS, who's funding farmers to implement these practices. I also want to stress that this doesn't include the funding that the farmer's going to have to put up to change some of these practices. So that is important to recognize as well. So with that kind of wraps up my overview. I think we're moving into questions, correct? And oh no, Lucas is up.
Yeah, we got Lucas yet. Leif, appreciate your presentation. We do have a question that came in while you were presenting, though, and you touched on it, but maybe a little more detail. How can a farmer who lives in or near that pilot project area get involved? Can any farmer in the project area take part?
Yep. So any farmer who's willing to implement a soil health practice can take part in it. If we've got a couple of folks that are on board fully right now. One of our main like boots on the ground partners is the Stearns Soil and Water Conservation District. So they're a good place to start, especially if you have a relationship with them as well. Centra Soda Co-op has been active and launched this thing, and we're hoping to get kind of all the co-ops and ag retailers in the area up to speed on this. And then, of course, myself is a good place to start as well.
And I just want to let our participants know that we are putting all kinds of different links up on the chat feature. But if you are asking a question, we ask that you go to the Q&A portal on your Zoom screen to ask questions. And we're going to bring all three presenters back at the end to take a few round robin questions. But Leif, one thing that kind of, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, but it kind of dawned on me for maybe the last 10 years or so, when we talk about soil and water health, farmers have certainly been identified as part of the problem. And here's an opportunity to be part of the solution. And I think to let the industry come in and kind of fix it has to give farmers some encouragement.
Well, and that's just it. I try to keep a positive focus, right? And much of our ag practices and our conservation practices, like if you look at like NRCS and the USDA, they qualify everything with best available science. And I think that's something that's often overlooked or underappreciated, right? We know more today than we did yesterday. And with that knowledge comes a need for evolution, right? Some of the practices of the past were pretty detrimental, yes, but we are learning more every day about which ones are detrimental and which ones are good. And TNC and the partners we're working with, see a very real pathway to ag being, very much so part of a solution versus part of a problem. So, I'm hoping that Lucas will bring it up, but the dairy industry is focusing on their net zero campaign with the idea that, hey, we think that there's a real pathway where like a dairy farm is completely carbon neutral, if not like full on into the mitigation side of things. So anyway, best available science. We know more today, and we just need to kind of accelerate that evolution with that new knowledge.
Appreciate your presentation and invite you to hang around to the end. We'll see if we get you a few questions. Thanks, Leif. With that, Lucas Sjostrom, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Am I coming through clearly?
You are loud and clear.
Great. Well, thanks. I will be pretty brief and we can get to the questions because Steve and Leif have laid it out well. But as you heard before, and as the symbol, I get made fun of sometimes because people think I'm a gamer with this headset on. But I'm not a gamer. I work for Midwest Dairy, and we communicate about sustainability practices, among many other things, including with gamers, because they're influencers, but community leaders, state and federal government as appropriate. And as Leif just mentioned, we have a 2050 goal that we believe we won't have too much trouble achieving. We will need to do some work to get there to be net zero, or our net zero initiative, which means we believe the dairy industry as a whole will be carbon free. And of course, we're all working on improved water quality. So we as Midwest Dairy want to support partnerships like this through the communications of these efforts and help consumers understand farmers are making progress. So that's the Midwest Dairy side of my role. Minnesota Milk, we work and get more involved on the profit side. And so I'm also here to help with any legislative or regulatory changes that may need to be happening for this to be streamlined, and also help put on workshops or solicit farmers to participate. Bob Lefebvre, also from a kind of big picture strategy role, helps me on the Midwest Dairy side and is looking to implement these sorts of things in our other states as well that Midwest Dairy serves, which is about 9 Midwest states. But in the end, between the two organizations, we just want farmers to succeed. And so we're here trying to vet this project amongst others. And we hope as farmer-funded organizations, we can't promise anyone that it's going to fit your management or your farm, but if attendees are interested, we can promise that the amount of interest in carbon, water, air, soil health, all of it continues to grow in the consumer and legislative side of my role, and also through university research. And of course, this is happening because of both consumer and taxpayer interest. So one of the things we've leveraged, and Leif touched on it a bit already, is we have both farm credit and farm business management through Minnesota State helping us through these projects. And we really want to know what everything costs, and hopefully what everything profits, or what farmers would lose per year or per acre in a realistic sense, to see what this looks like. That's going to help us go to the market, or if the government's part of the market, figure out this is what farmers will need to get paid to use these practices. And so, I personally am an animal science guy and work with the groups you heard at the beginning: university, government, consumers, industry. And so I rely on soil water conservation district staff, our ag cooperatives and ag retailers, NRCS, among others, people like Leif from the Nature Conservancy, because our goal collectively is just to pencil this out the best that we can. And so my take is that manure and alfalfa is a good start alone. And if dairy farmers are adding more on top of that, we're going to be able to measure both the financial impact and environmental impact of that. So when we go to the market, we can get it right. And I get really frustrated. And one of the big parts I've tried to do in my 4.5 years in this role is try to get all the different conservation programs telling farmers and incentivizing them the same way. And so we are lucky in Minnesota. We have a program that kind of does that, the Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program, which is something that isn't it intersects with this program. It isn't necessarily this program, but it's something maybe as a stepping stone that people can get into to be part of ESMC. So Dan, I'm going to stop there and I'll turn it back to questions. And I see we have several coming in already, but thanks for the time and thanks for inviting us, AURI. I think this is important and the beginning of something very good.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucas. Appreciate that, Lucas Sjostrom. And you're right, we do have some questions coming in, so I'll have our 3 panelists join me here on the screen and we'll just work from the top. And anybody who feels comfortable can pick it up and run with it. Are you working with any local governments or municipalities in the watershed?
So, Conservation districts, I always say, are quasi-government. So obviously they're a lead partner on this. And then we've got, we're going to be working with MPCA, especially as we dive into the water quality credits to make sure that they are going to be good enough credits to help folks meet permits and stuff like that. Yeah, I would say that those are kind of the big, and then obviously Department of Ag through their Ag Water Quality Certification Program. So they're definitely one of the lead partners on this.
So I would say, Dan, that the groundwork is being laid obviously with the agencies to be able to, be ready for those municipal sort of discussions, so that the tracks are kind of in place before we get into and doing it.
We have somebody on the line today that is not in the pilot project area and would like to be in the pilot project. They say they're down in the Fairmont or Martin County area. Is that possible?
It is, but so, the way we've got it set up right now is that we're really trying to keep focused on the on the Sauk River watershed for a couple of reasons. But, we are willing to kind of branch out of that for either a unique kind of cropping system or something like that, just to we want to test this thing out in different scenarios and on different types of farms to see how it integrates. So if you're interested and you're doing something cool, please reach out to me.
So just to clarify, this is a pilot phase where we're testing here in Minnesota. It's hoped that in 2022, this program could go national and would be then available, across U.S. agriculture and certainly other counties in Minnesota.
Let me ask you about that, because, when I think pilot, I'm thinking about a test plot at a university or something, but you guys are actually going into a real farming relationship for your pilot project. Is that right?
That's correct. So we're leveraging kind of that research at the farm scale, like at the the land grant university or USDA kind of plot farm, and now we're taking it one step forward. So it's how can we're using that research to figure out the equation, right? The algorithm behind the scenes, but now it's like, okay, how do we actually make this thing work in a living ag community, quite frankly,
And Dan, I think one of the special things about dairy farms is there's just so many more components. And so that's why we got farm business management and farm credit through Compeer involved to try to standardize things quite a bit. I see a later question. I'm going to jump ahead. Somebody asking about dairy farmers making corn silage and not taking advantage of cover crops. Why? I won't answer the question right now, but I'll say on every farm, there's about 15 different reasons maybe about why something happens or doesn't happen, because this is such a system. And so you can't just say, oh, I'm gonna start being a conservationist. I think everybody wants to be a conservationist, but in the dairy system, if you pull on this lever, you may be accidentally pushing on this one. So we're trying to figure out how these things work together. And I think the dairy system's pretty dynamic to do that with.
Generating. Oh, go ahead.
I just have one more thing to add on, the geography kind of question that Steve mentioned. Trading like this isn't a new idea, but the challenge that we run into is that overhead piece. And that's one of the nice things about a national, kind of platform like ESMC or one of the other ones that's on the market as like that's out there as well, is that this would be pre-established. Any farmer could go on, generate some credits, put them on the marketplace, and then people can go on and buy them. They don't have to go out, like I think there's some water quality trading happening down by Mankato, right? Well, those local partners had to come together, go recruit farmers, figure out how they're going to make, this is going to be a plug and play. It's established. It's known. It's got kind of because it's a marketplace, hopefully it'll have a buffering capacity. So if you lose a farmer, you're not, out of luck on your permit kind of deal. So anyway, just plugging for a broader marketplace for these credits.
Well, if that kind of tees up my next question or our listeners' next question, generating or determining credits seems easier than selling them. How do you know that you have buyers for the credits that are being developed?
That's a challenge, right? And but I'm pretty optimistic, especially, I mean, you just look everywhere. So on the carbon side, right? How many companies in the last year have announced aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals for their supply chain? I mean, you look at Cargill alone, 30% reduction. You know, that's a lot of carbon. That's a lot of carbon credits. You know, you name it. Everybody is looking at their, you know, like the footprint that their supply chain has on our environment, and I think there's going to be, I think, and I hope that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for buyers. So.
And a follow-up to that would be, are companies currently committed to buying Scope 3 credits in this project?
So in ours, we don't have one, and so we're very much so in recruitment mode. So if you work for a company and you're like, hey, I've got part of my supply chain in that area, or you're just looking to buy you know, some carbon credit off of market, or you're interested in water quality credits, you know, let us know. Some of the other pilots that are launched, you know, already have that kind of buyer. So like, obviously General Mills is taking advantage of all the carbon that's being generated in Kansas. The pilot that TNC is helping launch in Nebraska, that's a partnership between Target, Cargill, and McDonald's. So, you know, obviously the corporate partners there are taking those credits and buying those credits. So on the location, but yep, that's something we're working on. Yeah.
Have someone who went through a Denella Meadows Fellowship in 2007 and 8, and since that time they've been doing the practices and building organic matter in their soils. So the question really becomes, am I going to get penalized by having a higher base?
So yeah, so this is a great question, and it's one that we're very active in trying to figure out how we can reward those folks that have been kind of those you know, like those thought leaders and those leaders in the community as it relates to soil health, right? Because they've already kind of harvested some of that low-hanging fruit and didn't get any credits for it. So even inside of ESMC, they're looking at ways that we can defensively look back 3 years. And then I don't know if you guys caught it, and I'm already forgetting the name of the document, but we just went public with a new, give me 2 seconds. It's the Food and Agricultural Climate Alliance. And so this is a group of 6 partners, a couple of environmental organizations, American Farm Bureau, as well as several others that have come out with a list of kind of federal level policy agenda items as it relates to agriculture, forestry, and climate. And one of those items is how can we recognize those kind of early adapters and make sure that they get kind of, they don't get left out of this new market. So
When you're talking with farmers, what kinds of questions do they have about these types of markets in general and in the project in particular? Anything that really seems to show up time after time when you pitch this to farmers?
For me, one of the first questions is how long is the contract? So, you know, for our pilot, it's a 5-year contract that the farmer has to sign. The other platforms, I'm not up to speed on all of them, but a lot of them are 5 to 10 year length contracts. Lucas or Steve, do you guys have, I mean, I've got a few more I can talk about, but I'm curious as to what you guys have been hearing.
Well, I think the previous question is something we talked about in our meetings a lot. The people on the Soil Water Conservation District Board or the Watershed Board are maybe doing a lot of these things already. And so, you know, how do we reward them without, you know, penalizing them, and also continue to capture carbon or whatever credits we're going for? So I think that's one of the big ones. And I think, again, the Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program may give us a baseline to say, hey, this makes you eligible. So we have that unique opportunity within the state. But I think a lot of people are just learning about conservation in the 2020 version of the word, which is a lot different than the even year 2000 sense of the word. So just getting the word out of why is my neighbor planting that, and what are the benefits of that? I think that's what we're hoping to communicate and get the word out about, showing, hey, this person didn't do what you did, but might have saved $50 an acre. So that's what I see a lot of questions around, is the new age conservation practices that a lot of people are just trying and may frankly be failing at. It's a risky time, but there's also reward in that risk, of course.
And if they are making money, they'll tell their neighbor, right? Probably. I have a question here. Are the farm wooded areas being included in this program?
That's another good question. So under ESMC, we're right now not going into like forestry, but there are several other similar platforms to this that are focused on forestry. So, that said, if you're looking at like a silver pasture type system, that would definitely be eligible, as well as, like alley cropping or stuff like that. So.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to go. We got several more here, so we're going to keep moving. I understand that from a standpoint of return on investment, a tax or a penalty has a much better return than a credit trading type scheme. Is that correct? And if so, doesn't it make sense to tax harmful fertilizers like anhydrous and use those funds to support systems and practices that support soil health? Is there a political will for this to happen?
Yeah, I think the last part of that is, the political will side of things. And I don't have a strong answer to what the political will is right now. For me, I think this is the way that we can move forward as quick as possible. And we can look at a much bigger picture, right? We can keep food at reasonable prices for Americans, and we can also get farmers a little bit of extra funding to improve their conservation practices on their farms. So for me, this is one of the best and quickest ways forward. I don't know if either of you guys have anything to add to that.
Yeah, Dan, I guess I would say what excites me about this is two things. It's positive, not regressive, not a negative thing. And it's about alignment. I think a lot with, we've seen a lot of consumer interest increase this last decade about where my food comes from and how it's produced. This whole thing can potentially, and my former employer gets a lot of pressure from consumers around, that's why we made the commitments, and now working with farmers. So this sort of provides a trading mechanism, a way to use the power of capitalism to really benefit in a positive way the interest of all three of those segments, food companies, consumers, and producers. That's why I think it's much more desirable. And I think the potential is much greater to have the outcomes of improving farmer livelihoods and improving conservation in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that really inspired. Like it, the nice thing about this trading idea is that it's very much so outcome focused, right? And it looks at an entire watershed, or it looks at the entire climate and says, okay, what sort of levels do we want to manage to? And I'll talk about the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. They've been big proponents of water quality trading for a couple decades now, but it doesn't live under their point source polluter program. It lives under their non-point source polluter program. So they see this as a way to scale up a solution to address, a larger non-point source pollution, which would be just a nightmare to try and regulate. So, or tax, quite frankly, So the trading platform allows for us to manage to an outcome, and it allows us to get, quite frankly, it allows us to get more people on board quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Got about 5 minutes left here. I've read a bit through the ESMC concept papers, but could you briefly summarize how the water quality credits in particular are allocated, measured versus modeled, verification, and what tools you are using to assess water quality benefits? Wow.
Leif, that's yours.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, you know, I'm not that deep into the weeds on the water quality side of things. You know, we've got a team of scientists at TNC that are on those, like, committees that are developing those algorithms, and then ESMC has their own scientists that are fully up to speed on that. So if you have questions, please reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with the right people. I'm sorry,
You see,
I just don't know.
that's fine. Do you see other projects like this being developed in Minnesota in the next few years?
I sure hope so. Yeah, and you know, like, you know, we were working with ESMC here, but I mean, that's not the only horse out there. So I think anything we can do to incentivize this sort of idea is good. You know, I always say, you know, there's three ways we're going to accelerate change in our ag systems. There's incentivize, there's a market-based solution. This includes straight up, like, showing how a practice can, you know, like, without, you know, trading or anything like that, but a practice makes sense for the farm's bottom line, and regulate. And incentivize is a good short-term, you know, solution, cost share, but, like, the market approach, I think, is that long-term driver of some of these practices, and keeping them on the landscape for you know, decades to come.
And Dan, just to remind the ESMC, what's nice, it's not a competitive deal. It's a nonprofit deal. So it's not, and all the protocols, the science, to this previous question, all this is open code, sort of, from a software. So people could replicate and steal it and scale it. That's the whole idea of rapid socialization of this thing across the U.S. agricultural sector.
And that's exactly what you're hoping happens after the pilot period is over.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
I think gentlemen, I think we're going to leave it there as we're coming up to the top of the hour. So I want to thank Steve Peterson and Leif Fixen, Lucas Shostrom for your time today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
That
Dan.
concludes AURI Connects Fields of Innovation for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. On December 7th, we will be part of the 2020 Food Ag Ideas Week for a discussion on commercializing new ag opportunities and what it takes to bring new and emerging crops to commercial markets. We are sharing a link so that you'll be able to get in the chat box so that you'll be able to register for that event. And we always welcome your feedback on our program, so please respond when we send you an evaluation. Thank you for participating today, and remember to join and like the Fields of Innovation Facebook page. For more information on Fields of Innovation or any of the work that AURI is involved with, you can go to auri.org.